What is going on? It's Sunday. I'm in my car. I'm ready to get some food. But it's a very special day today. It's September 11th. And today's thought of the day is from a guy named Nathan Hale. And Nathan Hale was a captain in the Continental Army during the American Revolution. And Nathan Hale said this. He said, "My only regret is that I have but one life to lose for my country." And I'm reading this guy's biography right now about Nathan Hale. And if there was ever a guy who was passionate about upholding and defending a way of life for other people, it was this guy. Back in 1775, George Washington drew his sword under an elm tree, and he declared himself the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And then a year later, we signed the Declaration of Independence, basically saying that we are 13 sovereign states that are independent of British rule. And then we were like, we better get ready because it's going to be time to fight soon. And the British are coming. And they did. And George Washington led the army against the British. And George Washington sucked as a general. He lost at almost every decisive battle there was. He lost at Georgetown. He lost at Brandywine. He lost at Long Island. And by now, all the other generals got together and they were like, George, listen, we pushed the British back up to Boston where the British fleet is docked. George, they're going to regroup. They're going to muster up, and then they're going to sail down from Boston, and they're going to take New York City. And George Washington goes, why would they take New York City? And they go, George, New York City splits the colonies in half. And New York City has a harbor large enough to dock the British fleet. You have to hold New York City, George. And he's like, I don't have enough men. I don't have the strategic know-how to hold New York City. But I have an idea. And he goes, we burn New York City and we burn the harbor. And the other generals are like, George, we can't burn New York City and burn the harbor. And he goes, nonsense, I'll write Congress. And funny enough, he writes Congress and they write him back and they're like, you can't burn New York City. And so he had to scrap that idea. But at this point, the British had sailed and launched their operation and they had made it to Long Island. And they took Long Island without any resistance. And they were going to use Long Island as a place to poison attack to New York City. And George was like, okay, I have another idea. We need a spy. And it's funny because like today, spying is like glamorized, like everyone's like 007. But back in the day, there was nothing glamorous about spying. There was nothing honorable about it. If you were captured as a spy, you were going to get hung. And that's what made it very dangerous. But he was like, we need a spy to go behind enemy lines and to gather intelligence on the enemy forces. So he sent that order down, and a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Knowlton from the Continental Army received the order. And after contemplating on it for a couple days, on the night of the third day, he got all of his officers together in a room. And he walked in, and he said, I'm speaking on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief, General George Washington. And I'm not going to ask any of you directly, but I need a volunteer to go behind enemy lines and to gather information on British forces and British troop movement. And it was dead silent in the room. No one spoke up. And then finally, someone cut the tension by standing up, and he said, I'm willing to fight and, if need be, die a soldier's death against the British. But to go in disguise behind the enemy's lines and to be captured and hung like a dog, this I will not do. And everyone was like, yeah, they nodded. They were like, what he said. And then another guy stood up, an ordinary guy who used to be a school teacher before commissioning in the army. And he stood up and he had the perfect reason to say he'd go. He was a school teacher. What is he going to do behind enemy line? He's a teacher. I'm going to go talk to my students and I have books. And his name was Nathan Hale. And when he stood up, he said, I'll do it. Everyone looked at him and were like, Nate, you can't do that. You're going to die. They're going to capture you and you're going to get hung. There's nothing honorable about being hung. And they were trying to talk him out of it. When actually, a year earlier, he was talking his own unit into staying together because the army wasn't paying them. The army or Congress wasn't paying the enlisted members in this unit. So they were like, they were going to disband. And he was like, no, we have to stay together. This is important. This is a cause worth fighting for. We need you. This is worthy of your time. So what he did was he took his own pay and he divided it up among the men. So he gave his money to them. to stay. And they were like, his troops, they were like, you can't do this, Nathan Hale. You're going to die. You're going to get captured. And you know what he said in response to that? I'm going to read this to you. In response to what they were saying about him being captured, here's what he said. He said, I think I owe my country an accomplishment so important and so much desired by the commander of her armies, and I know of no other mode of obtaining the information than by assuming a disguise and passing into the enemy's camp. I am fully sensible of the consequences of discovery and capture in such a situation, but for a year now, I have been attached to the army and have not rendered any material service and received compensation for which I make no return. Now remember, he gave his money to everybody else. He was basically saying, I'm getting paid and I haven't done anything. And then he goes on to say, I'm not yet influenced by the expectation of promotion. I do not expect any monetary reward. I only want to be useful. And every kind of service necessary for the public good becomes honorable by being necessary. Wow. And they nodded. And they were like, okay. So a couple nights later, he gets in a boat and he rows across the Long Island Sound. And he gets off the boat and he goes and does some intelligence gathering for a couple of days. And then he goes back under the cover of nightfall to where he began and where he was going to wait for the boat to come pick him back up. While he was waiting, he was surrounded by British troops. And he was questioned, and he was apprehended, and he was searched. And on his person, they found notes, they found drawings, and in his shoe, they found material that he had translated into Latin in case he was captured, but they were able to translate it. And they look at each other, and they look at Nathan Hale, and they say, you're a spy. And they go, you know what the penalty is for spying, don't you? And he goes, yes, I do. And the troops, they huddle back up again. And then they look at him and they say, we will pay you. We will give you money. We will let you go. If you go sail across the Long Island Sound again, and you go and get some information on this, that, and the other thing, and you come back to us. And he goes, no, I won't. And they go, why not? And he goes, I will not spy on my fellow countrymen. And they go, okay, take this guy. Let's go to the nearest fort. And they go to the nearest camp. And they tie him up in rope. They put his hands behind his back. They rope it together. They rope his ankles together. They put a noose around his neck. And they string the noose on a tree on the fort. And with all the British soldiers in formation, they look at him and they go, do you have any last words or regrets? And Nathan Hale, with his face resolute, his eyes on the horizon, he says, my only regret is that I have but one life to lose for my country. And the British look at each other and they go, hang this dude. And they hung him. And on September 22nd, Nathan Hale died, 1776. And I think that's worth remembering, because here's a guy who, without the proper training, virtually no training at all, to prepare himself for what he was about to undertake, and with the odds totally against him, went up and did this thing with only one thing, and that was the will to do it. The will to make a difference. And that's no different than the firefighters and the first responders on the morning of September 11th. They didn't have the training to prepare themselves for what they were about to face. They had the odds totally against them. They knew that they could die. But they had the will to help people. They had the will to make a difference. And they did it. And that's why I think it's worth remembering. That's all I got for today. Have a great week, and I'll talk with you soon.